Victoria introduces a cross-border traffic light system in a bid to keep coronavirus out. The FBI warns of armed protests across the United States as Democrats move to impeach President Donald Trump. And strict protocols unveiled to manage the COVID-19 risk as players begin to arrive for the Australian Open in Melbourne. Hello, welcome to ABC News. I'm Karina Carvalho. Queensland's Chief Health Officer says Brisbane's three-day lockdown has been enormously successful. The only locally acquired infection detected in the most recent reporting period is the partner of a quarantine hotel cleaner. Reporter Jessica Rendell has more from Brisbane.
Queensland's Chief Health Officer has said that there is a low risk associated with this new case. However, they have identified 2 days where he might have been infectious while out in the community. Those 2 days are the 5th and the 6th of January, leading up to him going into isolation on the 7th. They've now added 2 new venues to that contact tracing list, and they include Bunnings at Acacia Ridge on the 5th of January from 2 p.m. till 2:40 p.m, and the Sunnybank Cellars on the 6th of January from 2:05 to 2:15 p.m. Anyone who has been in any of those locations is being urged to please come forward and get tested and self-isolate for 14 days, regardless of if you are showing symptoms. The Chief Health Officer received some criticism for her 3-day lockdown. Here's what she had to say in response earlier.
We had to go and do something immediately, do it quickly and just get it managed, and that's what I think we've achieved. So I think that 3-day circuit breaker really is what I'm calling it, just sets the framework, and the response here in Greater Brisbane I think was absolutely brilliant.
Despite lockdown being over here in Brisbane, there are still some restrictions in place, including a mask mandate. People are being asked to keep their masks on them at all times when they leave the house and put it on when they're in a situation where they can't socially distance, and inside shopping malls, supermarkets and other buildings as well.
There have been 5 new locally acquired coronavirus cases in New South Wales. 2 were revealed yesterday, a man who attended Mount Druitt Hospital and one of his close contacts. Reporter Ashley Raper has more.
We did know about 2 of today's 5 cases, and they are related to that couple in Mount Druitt. Now, the worry with those 2 cases are that they still don't know how that pair contracted the virus. They haven't been able to link it to any of the outbreaks or clusters, so work is still being done around that. Now, of the other cases, 1 is linked to the Baralla cluster and was a close contact, so was in isolation. And then there are 2 cases on the northern beaches. Now, they're in the northern zone that has just come out of lockdown this week, and they haven't yet been able to link these cases to the Avalon cluster, so work is still going on around there. Now, the Premier Gladys Berejiklian has been very clear this week that while we seem in New South Wales to have a much better handle on the outbreaks, they're referring it to here that we're in the mopping up phase and there's still remnants of the virus circulating, and that is evident by the figures today. And they're really calling on people to come forward for testing, because in the past 24 hours there are only 14,000 tests done, and they're saying that's by far not enough, that those numbers need to be up to 25 or 30,000 a day.
Please do not assume this outbreak is over in New South Wales. The rumblings are there. We're still mopping up. Whilst we're confident that there hasn't been another super spreading event, that's only for today. It can happen again if we don't stay vigilant, and we really need to get those testing rates up. And I'm appealing to the community, whether you have the mildest of symptoms, please make sure you come forward and get tested and follow the rules.
And Ash, there are growing questions about how New South Wales is handling these outbreaks. Particular criticism has come from the West Australian Premier Mark McGowan.
Yes, this is by no means the first time premiers of other states have criticised each other during this pandemic. But yesterday, the WA Premier Mark McGowan did say that New South Wales should be looking to other states to kill the virus. Now, he's saying that the other states are doing, snap lockdowns and are being tougher on restrictions. And this notion that he believes New South Wales is following, that they can live alongside the virus, just is the wrong approach. This is a criticism of how New South Wales is managing COVID. Now, Gladys Berejiklian has come out today and said what Mark McGowan is suggesting is that you can eliminate the virus, and you just can't do that. And she said all states, including New South Wales, are committed to and working towards no community transmissions. And she said that the restrictions that are in place in New South Wales are working towards that goal, and she is confident in that strategy. And she said, looking at the numbers and the downward trends of how they've handled the outbreak, she believes that the strategy in New South Wales is working. She has no plans to change that, Karina.
The ACT government will lift COVID-19 travel restrictions for parts of Sydney, along with the New South Wales Central Coast, Wollongong and the Blue Mountains. Currently, non-residents are unable to enter the ACT if they have been to those areas in the past 2 weeks. Restrictions will remain in place for people who have been to 11 local government areas still deemed hotspots in Sydney, including the Northern Beaches, the Inner West and parts of Western Sydney. Victoria's traffic light permit system has gone live to help people stuck in regional New South Wales return home. More than 31,000 permits have been processed in the first few hours. Reporter Jackson Peck has more from the border city of Wodonga.
Victoria's new traffic light permit system came into effect last night. Everywhere has been designated either a red zone, an orange zone or a green zone. Greater Brisbane and Greater Sydney have been designated as a red zone, as well as Wollongong, which means that people from those areas are not able to enter Victoria unless they have an official exemption. The whole of regional New South Wales has been designated as a orange zone. This is great news for thousands of Victorians who have found themselves stranded on the New South Wales side of the border once the border closed. They are now able to enter Victoria with a permit, but they'll have to get a COVID test and they'll have to isolate until they get a negative. The green zone is for the rest of Australia. People can enter Victoria easily with this permit, but the permit is simply for contact tracing purposes. This is what the Victorian government has said. There was a bit of a hiccup last night when the system went live at 6 p.m. People found that they couldn't get online to get their permits. DHHS tweeted out an apology a bit after 9 p.m. saying that the site was now live, and the Victorian Police Minister Lisa Neville today has apologised and said that no one will be fined for having an incorrect permit or not having a permit last night due to the system fault. There's no real change for border residents. Border residents are now the only people in Australia who do not need a permit to enter Victoria. They can just use their licence or some proof of address to show that they live in one of the 33 local government areas along the Murray River, and they can cross back and forth. There was a little bit of confusion when the announcement was initially made because people were just getting used to the previous rules, but now locals know that they can cross back and forth in the same way that they were before. There is, of course, still some frustration that there are checkpoints at all. It obviously adds a wait time for people who go back and forth multiple times a day, and we've heard from a lot of tourism businesses on the New South Wales side who are still devastated from a lot of the tourists leaving just as the border was closing. They're finally seeing a lot of people going along and spending money in the region. Now with the new permit system, for example, if someone from Melbourne wanted to come in and holiday on the New South Wales side of the border, they would have to get a COVID test and isolate on the way back. So it means that it's not much help for businesses on this side who really depend on Victorians over the summer. I spoke to Albury Mayor Kevin Mack a little bit earlier about this issue. Here's what he had to say.
We've had three announcements in 3 weeks. I mean, really, not very well communicated. Yet again, we've been given ultimatums with very short turnarounds and very short timelines. And to be honest, to find the map on the website, the Service Victoria website, is a chore as well. But you know, they'll get there. But to be honest, I still don't believe the border should be closed. I don't think there is necessary evidence or medical support to say it should be closed.
Another great day for Victoria, 6 days in a row now with 0 cases from community transmission. Also 0 cases from hotel quarantine. This came from more than 18,000 tests, and there are now only 38 active cases in the state.
Stories are emerging of Victorian residents being kept in hotel quarantine despite having exemptions from the state government. Daniel Hand and his partner were placed into quarantine in Melbourne last week after holidaying in Byron Bay and on the Gold Coast. Neither region was declared a red zone at the time they visited. Daniel Hand, who's still in quarantine, says they left Byron Bay for Queensland on December the 31st after the Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews instructed residents of that state to leave New South Wales.
We left to go to the Gold Coast and then stayed there for 9 days, and then upon returning to Melbourne 4 days ago, we were told we needed to go into hotel quarantine, which was quite a shock to us given the sort of the lack and sort of misguidance that we received, and we on our research on the DHHS website and stuff.
Because it seems as though you followed all the rules. So you got to Queensland from northern New South Wales before the deadline at the end of last month, and you stayed on the Gold Coast, which is not considered part of Greater Brisbane, which went into 3 days of lockdown. So you thought you'd be fine to return to Melbourne.
Yeah, exactly. Given sort of the situation that people were able to travel into Victoria from New South Wales as of the 31st midnight, without having to quarantine, without having to do any sort of isolation or anything, that we were able to travel to Queensland and do the same thing, given that we wouldn't return into New South Wales at all. So given that information, we thought we would be okay to return to Victoria.
So how forthcoming has DHHS, which is the Victorian Health Department, been in your situation?
It's been quite difficult to sort of contact them. There's the only number that was available over the weekend was the basically the hotline, which had people who are working from home, who are basically there to give advice on social distancing and sort of coronavirus matters. And then given sort of they've kept saying we'll escalate it, and it's just been like we haven't heard anything from the DHS over the past 4 days after, over 10 phone calls to different departments and everyone saying that they would escalate it. And it's quite disappointing, and it's quite difficult to sort of be so helpless here in hotel quarantine, given all that sort of information we've given.
You've been in hotel quarantine since January the 8th. How frustrating is it?
Yeah, we just feel so helpless, and sort of we have no control over the situation at all. We've just been told to wait for the process. DHHS will inform the hotel Department of Justice, the people who are working here, that they can release us. So it's just a waiting game, really.
And have you had to pay for hotel quarantine?
I haven't heard anything yet, so I definitely hope not.
Yeah, because that would seem particularly unfair in this situation. What do you think is behind the confusion or the fact that they haven't been able to give you any more information as yet?
I'm not too sure, to be honest. I feel like there's, just from my personal experience, that there's too many sort of a lack of information and so much grey area in terms of in my personal situation, specifically in people travelling into Queensland from border towns in New South Wales. So the lack of information and the grey areas there that within the DHHS and the people on the ground having, so much rules and so many different departments trying to talk to each other makes it a little bit difficult to sort of get everyone on the same page. So I think that has been the main issue so far in terms of sort of trying to assess and get any correspondence back from the DHHS.
Would the traffic light system, which has now been introduced, have helped you?
I think so. It looks a lot more sort of
streamlined
in terms of with the colour coding. So I'd hope so for other people who are trying to return back into Victoria. It helps them, yeah.
And so what has this done in terms of your plans to return to work after the holidays?
Yeah, I've had to take a couple of days off, but hopefully after this we can just head back into work and live life normally.
Yeah, and so is there any timeline onto when you might get more information or be released from hotel quarantine? Because you're obviously hoping that you don't have to keep going for the full 14 days. Yeah,
the team here are quite good and have sort of tried to address our concerns as much as they can, escalating it to DHHS, and they've said recently in the past hour or so that hopefully today we should be able to leave.
That was Daniel Hand speaking to us earlier. South Australia's border rules with New South Wales and Greater Brisbane will remain unchanged for now, but there are plans to review restrictions again later this week. New South Wales residents are not allowed to enter South Australia, while people from Greater Brisbane need to self-isolate for 2 weeks.
We have met as a transition committee today, and we've looked at the epidemiology and the case numbers both in New South Wales and also what is happening up in Queensland, and we have not made any changes, so there's no changes to any border arrangements at this stage. So people coming from Greater Brisbane, they're not being stopped coming from Greater Brisbane, but will require a 14-day quarantine period coming into our state as well as testing. From the perspective of New South Wales, Wales. Again, we are closely monitoring that situation. Unfortunately, there have been some more cases there, and whilst it isn't the UK variant, please remember that no matter what form of COVID it is, no matter which variant it is, still would be very significant for us in South Australia if we had any community transmission.
Let's move to the US, where House Democrats have introduced their resolution to impeach the President Donald Trump, charging him with incitement of insurrection for his role in last week's riots at the Capitol. It's the Democrats' first step towards making Donald Trump America's first president to be impeached twice. Dr. Carla Winston is a lecturer in international relations at the University of Melbourne. She says Republicans can still put up a fight in the Senate for now.
They'll definitely follow through in the House. The Senate is a little bit less clear. I'm fairly certain Mitch McConnell will not follow through as the current Senate Majority Leader, but his term expires on January 20th when the new president and vice president are inaugurated. At that point, the Senate will be 50-50 with Vice President Harris as the tie vote, so it will shift over and Chuck Schumer will be in charge of that decision. The Democrats in the House have been thinking about possibly delaying sending over the articles of impeachment until the first 100 days are over, or having split sessions where they do the trial in the morning and do other business in the afternoon. I think they will get to it. The question is when and how.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that timetable, because if the Senate trial extends beyond January 19, which there's every indication that it would, that would impede on Joe Biden's 100 days agenda, wouldn't it?
It might. So the 100 days agenda includes a whole bunch of very mundane things at the start of any administration, like getting cabinet appointments and other high-level political appointments Senate confirmed. There's a huge number of those to get done, and that's usually something that happens very quickly. The other part is getting the pieces of legislation through that the Biden administration has outlined as really, really important, including the expanded COVID relief. So to the extent that the trial has to be scheduled around all of this other business, as well as around the Supreme Court business, so that John Roberts, the Chief Justice, can preside over the trial, we could see some delays in one or the other or both. It's going to be a matter of working quickly and of dealing with timing.
Is impeachment in this case really about stopping Donald Trump from running in 2024?
I'd say it's a number of things. For some Democrats and even some Republicans, potentially, that might be the most important part, is to make sure that whatever continued influence he has on the political process, he's no longer able to be the figurehead of that effort, and it has to fall on someone else to blunder or not. There is a very strong sentiment among certainly Democrats, but some Republicans as well, that impeachment is absolutely warranted, that this is something that is damaging to the United States that he has done, that absolutely warrants a response, just period. That you must punish those who do this, or else someone will try it again in the future. If not Trump, then somebody else. So the sense of looking out for the country and its democracy actually does run strong with some members of Congress. And those with whom it does so are seriously considering a conviction.
How concerning is it that the FBI is warning about widespread protests in the next week?
This is the kind of memo that the FBI would have sent privately anyway. This is the security information that gets shared between the FBI and its field offices, between the FBI and state and local police and security services, goes through back channels all the time. And so had there been protests at any particular state capitol, they would have known about it and sent it privately. There are a couple of issues with it being public. One is it's likely to serve as a little bit of a deterrent for anyone who was thinking of joining. We're seeing arrests after the Capitol protests, /riot, /mob, et cetera. And so the threat of arrest for a state capitol protest might deter some people from coming out. It's also a little bit of a nudge to state and local security actors who might have been less than enthusiastic or less than willing to believe that this was going to be a problem. So this is the FBI saying publicly, we are warning you, if you underestimate this problem and something happens, it's on you. Basically, it's the FBI a little bit covering itself by making its regular forms of security information public.
And you can watch John Barron and Chaz Licciardello in a special pre-inauguration edition of Planet America next Wednesday night at 8:30 Eastern Daylight Time here on the ABC News channel. And then we'll have full coverage of the presidential inauguration live from 3:30 on Thursday morning across all ABC platforms. The acting Prime Minister has rejected calls for an apology after he compared the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests with last week's attack of the US Capitol. Labor has also criticised the acting Prime Minister for using the All Lives Matter phrase while defending his previous comments. Political reporter Noor Haider has more from Parliament House.
The acting Prime Minister, Michael McCormack, has dismissed criticism directed towards him by a leading human rights organisation. Representatives from Amnesty International have called on Mr McCormack to withdraw comments he made comparing last week's attack on the US Capitol with last year's Black Lives Matter protests. Now, Amnesty International described the comparison as deeply offensive, and it also criticised Mr McCormack for labelling the protests against racial inequality and police brutality as a race riot. Now, Mr McCormack, he says he won't be apologising for the comments. Today, he even invoked the All Lives Matter slogan, which has in the past been used by Trump supporters. That phrase is considered by many to be a disingenuous phrase used to undermine or erase the inequalities faced by Black Americans. Take a listen to Mr McCormack here, where he says that both events involved violence.
There was violence, there was destruction, there was uninsured property that business owners then have to dig deep into their own pockets to rebuild, and then of course there's lives lost. Well, Amnesty International and others, and I appreciate there are a lot of people out there who are being a bit bleeding hard about this and who are confecting outrage, but they should know that those lives matter too. All lives matter. People shouldn't have to go to a protest and lose their life.
Now, this afternoon, we've also heard from the Shadow Health Minister, Chris Bowen. He's been quick to criticise Mr McCormack's latest comments. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Those people around the world who engaged in peaceful protest in the Black Lives Matter movement deserve better than to have their acting leader, their acting Prime Minister, compare them to the violence and thuggery we saw at the US Capitol last week. Australians of colour deserve to know their government thinks more of them than that, and to have the acting Prime Minister spout the words "All Lives Matter" to diminish the Black Lives Matter movement was beyond disgusting.
Nor Federal Labor has also described coalition backbencher Craig Kelly as a menace who must be condemned by his own government. What's brought that about?
Well, the acting Prime Minister, Michael McCormack, today again refused to condemn some of his coalition colleagues for spreading misinformation online. Coalition MPs George Christensen and Craig Kelly have repeatedly throughout the course of the COVID-19 pandemic spread information about mask wearing or vaccines that it doesn't or is not in line with the government's official message. They've also spread misinformation about who was behind the attacks on the US Capitol. This morning we heard Mr Kelly, he used his Facebook to claim that mandatory mask wearing was akin to child abuse, and he said that should be considered a crime. Now that's prompted the opposition, that's prompted Shadow Health Minister Chris Bowen to argue that the Prime Minister and the acting Prime Minister should stop hiding behind the notion of free speech and more strongly condemn some of the government MPs who have been spreading this misinformation online. Take a listen to what Chris Bowen had to say today. He said that Mr Kelly was undermining official government messages and was spreading unproven medicine.
Craig Kelly is a menace, and at every turn, Scott Morrison and now Michael McCormack, acting Prime Minister, have failed to call him out. They've hidden behind weasel words about freedom of speech. Well, the Chief Medical Officer and the TGA deserve more support and respect than that from their government.
and that was the Shadow Health Minister Chris Bowen responding to comments by the Acting Prime Minister Michael McCormack. Now, he, in refusing to rebuke his colleagues, said that he doesn't support censorship and his colleagues were free to express their views online.
Nor Hayder reporting there from Canberra. All GPs are being invited to participate in the Australian immunisation program next week. The program will provide training for people to become vaccinators. The first group of Australians will be immunised in mid to late February.
That vaccination network is built around our general practices with support from our pharmacies. And so our general practices will commence when the AstraZeneca vaccine commences as part of stage 1B. And next week we'll be inviting all Australian general practices to participate if they wish. That will involve making sure that they're able to participate in the Australian Immunisation Register and record all vaccinations, to undertake the appropriate training, and if they wish, if they see themselves as a vaccinator, to participate in that program.
With the Australian Open going ahead in Melbourne next month, there are new rules to ensure it's COVID safe, but concerns remain about the players and their entourages due to arrive in the coming days. Beth Gibson reports.
The Victorian government has described the new Australian Open quarantine program as the strictest in the world. 1,200 players and staff